All right, Marcus, let's talk about the biggest fucking flash in the pan story in the history of this scene. A star that burned so bright that 4 days later, when we finally discuss it, you wonder if it ever even existed at all.
Yeah, this is a 4-day-old leftover that you left in, like, you just forgot about in the fridge.
It felt like the most important thing that ever happened in this scene for the 2 days that it was on the tip of everyone's tongue, only for 2 days later to wonder if it ever really happened at all. Marcus, let's talk about the fucking Popular MonsTour. On March 7th, Falling in Reverse announced their headlining tour for this summer. Named after what is arguably their biggest hit song at this point, Popular MonsTour. It would have, upon announcement, direct support from Ice Nine Kills, with additional support on select dates from Under Oath, Spiritbox, Slaughter to Prevail, Crown the Empire, and Catch Your Breath. Now, the announcement was met with significant pushback. From fans specifically, as best I could tell, Ice Nine Kills, Under Oath, and Spiritbox's bases, because they kind of felt that the bands were compromising their base values in choosing to support Falling in Reverse and additionally tour alongside Crown the Empire. Why? Falling in Reverse frontman Ronnie Radke is obviously extremely polarizing. As summed up recently by UltimateGuitar.com, Ronnie Radke has a history that includes, and I quote, 2.5 years of prison behind him, a domestic battery charge that was dropped, a mixed stand throwing incident, and accusations of sexual assault. Crown the Empire guitarist Brandon Hoover is accused of domestic assault by ex-girlfriend Heidi Ferguson, but per a recent statement from Crown the Empire denying the allegations, Brandon remains in the band. Approximately 1 week after the pushback that these bands received, Spiritbox officially announced that they were going to be dropping off their dates of the tour. While the band didn't specify any reasoning, most people speculate that it was a combination of displeasure and pushback from that band's fan base, incensed further by Radke's sort of self-acknowledged antagonistic Twitter presence.
Right. So a couple of things there. You mentioned, obviously, that this support is all on additional dates, save for Ice Nine Kills, who are direct support throughout the entirety of the run, which it looked pretty significant. I think it was like about 30 dates or so. So off and on between all of that, you've got Slaughter to Prevail jumping on, you've got Crown the Empire, Spiritbox at the time, Catch Your Breath. And in totality, Spiritbox was only on 7 dates officially. I feel like it's important to notate that because I think the only dates that they shared with any other opening act was just Catch Your Breath. So this was not a 6-band bill, just to clear that up as well.
Yeah. So essentially, I think it's easy to go back and say, hey, Spiritbox were just on 6 dates, just support. But ultimately what people see are the names on the poster. And that's what they're making their mind up of. You know, additional information comes to light.
Right.
And then there's further discussion.
That asterisk and that slash mark and that hashtag mark or whatever are all, you know,
the number one trend that needs to die.
1% of that tour poster. And you're right. Like, obviously, throwback to the Bad Omens fiasco. People either see a band name on a tour poster or it's too small and they don't.
Or they need a magnifying glass. Yeah. Precisely correct. So what I ultimately wanted to discuss talking about all of this was just sort of the overall reaction from people in the scene and sort of the varied reaction that people had. You know, so we asked our followers on Twitter, hey, generally, now that like the dust had cleared like 24 hours after Spiritbox had dropped off and it didn't look like any other bands were dropping off of this tour, and ticket sales, as far as I can tell, were through the roof. How do we feel about this? So Maxie said, I'm disappointed that they, Spiritbox, agreed to the tour in the first place, but that doesn't overshadow the fact that I appreciate that they pulled out. I understand people still being semi-upset, but pulling out was the best case scenario besides them never agreeing in the first place. Now, there was a lot of this when Spiritbox announced that they were dropping off the tour. It was sort of a combination. And when they dropped off, it was matter of fact, right? It wasn't a 3-paragraph description of the complete thought process that led to this decision. It was, hey, we're not on this tour anymore. And what most people seem to agree on is like, all right, you know, Spiritbox listened to their fan base who, if at the very least, judging from the social media response, was less than positive, and said, all right, we're just going to drop this tour. Whatever these 6 or 7 dates aren't worth it, right? And that was sort of coupled with the fact that people were like, well, why take it in the first place, right? And I think that for people on social media, everything is very black and white. Every move is, whether from an individual or from a brand or a band, it's only looked at in terms of like W's and L's. So everyone has to sort of give their official ranking of a decision. You know what I mean? So it's like, hey, this is a W because, this is an L because. It can't, there's never any room for gray area. But ultimately, I kind of think that this is a perfect example of there being gray area. Spiritbox took the tour, and then based on feedback, dropped the tour.
Well, I was going to say, perfect example of gray area that you feel hasn't exactly been acknowledged, and that's the point you're going to make, or...
What I mean to say is that sometimes things are exactly what they seem, right? And they don't necessarily need to be elaborated on and broken down significantly to a point that everyone feels like every last aspect of a decision has been completely illuminated so that they understand it, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's just exactly as it appears, right? Spiritbox took a tour, fans weren't happy, they dropped off a tour. Ultimately, it'll be forgotten already. Do you kind of see what I'm saying here?
I do.
Katie said, didn't care that they Spiritbox agreed to it, didn't care that they dropped off of it. Saw a lot of this too. People sort of ultimately not having a strong opinion one way or another, right? The industry is a business and Falling in Reverse sells tickets and a lot of them. It would have been a huge tour for them to be a part of, but it seems like they let Twitter bully them out of it. Now, Twitter bullying them out of it is like the dark side to the light side, right? Like you can look at it one of two ways. Twitter said how I felt, Spiritbox listened, they drop off. Twitter said how they felt, Spiritbox were pressured, and they dropped off. Now, in this sense, yes, it is hard without Spiritbox defining exactly what is going on from their point of view to say if their rationality was more of doing something because they felt they had to or doing something because they, at this point, had just chose to, right? I think ultimately I give a band a benefit of the doubt in this situation and say, okay, ultimately, if they looked at the comment section and felt like a vast majority of Spiritbox fans weren't happy, that drove them to drop off the tour. And I think that's fair. Now, what I kind of also want to talk about here, though, is this idea that the industry as a business is something that I feel like we all acknowledge, but at the same time have no patience for. Do you know what I mean?
Elaborate.
Which is to say that we all go, okay, we understand that not everyone that you work with is going to share your same base value, right? Mm-hmm. And in that sense, every band that Spiritbox ever tours with may not mirror their viewpoints, right? So for them to take this tour, I don't think it's a sign of support for every artist and all of their views on that tour. And I don't think that can ever be said of every band and every tour they're on, right? I think it's almost an impossibility. Like, if that's your standard, you kind of set yourself up for failure, right? And there are levels, sure, no denying that. And in this case, you know, you might look at Spiritbox and say, okay, they weighed the levels and they said, hey, it leans now after feedback that we feel ultimately it's better that we make this decision now. But this is tough because, for example, Severus said on Twitter, fans should stop cherry picking which lineups are appropriate versus not. We have several examples, including a festival featuring an artist that's condemned by some on it, but no one did anything like cyberbully anyone on the festival into dropping off. Then why now? And that's a good point too. It's not like this is the first tour Falling in Reverse has announced in a decade. This is the 30th.
Mm-hmm.
The pushback wasn't there for the last tour or the tour before that or any of the multiple festival appearances. But for this one in particular, people were incensed to speak up. It is worth sort of wondering why that's the case. I can't speak to it directly.
Well, I think it's actually kind of easy to understand why this was the case. I think you don't really have to look any farther than just the particular band. And I know that, fans of Under Oath and Ice Nine Kills also voiced some displeasure, but at the end of the day, it's Spiritbox, and Spiritbox had the highest charting debut album on the rock and metal charts in like the history of any band ever. And they're currently on the craziest trajectory we've seen since Bad Omens came around and stole it from them. But I think it mainly has to do just with the fact that this is Spiritbox, and it's not because Spiritbox have been outspoken about things in the past, and they very well may have. I'm speaking.
I think
in
they very
general.
well have.
Yeah, I think it's more so just it's a perfect storm of this being Spiritbox of all bands and touring with Falling in Reverse amidst what is the height of the criticism that band has ever endured, simply because of the gasoline and the stoking of the fire that Ronnie, in self-admittedly, like intentionally does as part of promoting new material, new tours, things like that.
Not 2 days after all of this sort of like this tour announcement sort of sparked all of this, I believe Ronnie tweeted, this is not verbatim, but something along the lines of like, I do this to get my name trending. And
he's definitely tweeted that in the past.
Right. The irony here, of course, is that Ronnie is extremely self-aware on the basis that this is called the Popular MonsTour, and Popular MonsTour is quite admittedly sort of self-acknowledging exactly what we're doing here, right? And it's been the case always, but once again, it's almost like it's weird to look at this in a vacuum and be like, oh, well, of course Spiritbox can't be on this tour with Falling in Reverse, but I'm almost certain that they were both on the recent cruise that was it like the Metal and Rock cruise? I can't remember the name
Shiprocked.
of it. Yeah, Shiprocked. So it's like no one was up in arms at that time, as best I could see, about these artists sharing a festival or sharing a stage. There does seem to be some sort of divide here when it comes to like individual tours and festivals. But for what it's worth, we've definitely seen instances where a lot of people have spoken up about artists being on festival bills before.
I think one of the more popular ones that I remember, this is back in the Warped Tour days, and granted before one of these bands would have other controversies prop up, but I always remember the feuding and the updates on these feuds as the tour progressed between Senses Fail and Chris Franzak of Attila, going back and forth talking shit about each other on stage, but ultimately neither band dropped off the bill because of the other one existing on it. They coexisted while also acknowledging that, especially at the time, that they hated each other.
Warped Tour feels like such a weird
it's
twist
a typical,
in the right,
because that was also it was the entire scene, or if it was 50% of it, and then the following year is the other 50% getting a run.
It is an interesting thing to point out, though, that
I think one important thing to notate before we get to what you wanted to share just now is the fact that this scene, it is hard to deny, is literally bigger than ever. Popular MonsTour is a massive song. Whether you like Falling in Reverse or not, whether you like that track or not, whatever, that is their most commercially successful song. But it's not just commercially successful at our level, at the scenes level. You have Popular MonsTour sitting at like 250 million streams on Spotify.
Right, like it's left the stratosphere, right?
The pressure is larger, but like the stakes are higher for everyone. You have We Came as Romans doing like 30 million on a song easy. Things like a Spiritbox pulling in 30 million on a fucking Bad Omens, again, not to name drop them 3 times on one segment, but fucking nearing on fucking 100 million by now with Just Pretend. The stakes are higher. Never before has this scene been this big.
But it's interesting that you also point out sort of like the way that these things were viewed years ago in like 2015 versus they are today. And just in general, it's very different, the reaction that you get from people then versus now. Sean said, I don't know why every band or person has to agree 100% and be able to stand by each and every word and action of the others in order to tour together. If the fan bases cross over and everyone has provided a unique and awesome show/experience, I see no problem. People can differ. Now, this has always kind of been my view, is that I don't think in working alongside, near, or acknowledging someone else is somehow a way of saying that I am fully in line with all of their views. But the issue here is that that's just not how people see it, right? And that prevents me from talking about certain bands within the scene, because I don't agree with everyone's viewpoint, but I also don't want to be labeled as agreeing with their viewpoints. So in some senses, that may be the best way to look at it, but it doesn't materialize like in actuality.
Yeah, fans' viewpoints, bands' viewpoints, both.
Yeah, specifically bands, because that's what we cover, right? Like when I post a band, when I talk about a band, that's not me acknowledging everything they've ever said or done, right?
Or will do, or whatever.
Right. But that's not how people see it, right? And that's how you have to think a Spiritbox has to look at the situation. It's like, you may take a tour like that, regardless of whether you're in line with the viewpoints of other bands on that tour, but ultimately, when people see your names together on a poster, they think that you're sharing that alignment, right? So it's almost like it's very difficult to beat that perception. Joe said it's not as big a deal, I think, as people are making it out to be. They took a tour. Fans asked them to back out. They did. Can we move on? Joe was probably the most right of anybody at this point, because it's exactly where we sit
right
now.
To Joe's credit,
Joe's got foresight.
Right. That's sort of where we sit right now. And granted, people obviously took to socials and were very, they spoke out very much during the announcement of Spiritbox supporting and then pulling out. And ultimately, they might still have those very same opinions about everything, but also now no one's talking about this.
Right, precisely. And like, we say no one in a sense that like it is not the topic of conversation the way that it was a week ago, right? And you have to wonder if Spiritbox dropping off that tour actually was sort of like the gallon of water on like this fucking fire, and it just completely doused the conversation entirely.
So I think
in the same sense that I wonder if Spiritbox in particular was ever on this poster, if it ever would have become what it became.
It is hard to say. I think that them being on this poster and it becoming what it became, there's a catalyst certainly through all of this, in that, how we spoke earlier about Ronnie very much being outspoken on Twitter and taking to that platform to voice a lot of opinions. And what is, I think, important to acknowledge to some degree is that like the magnifying glass never went away for like 72 hours post the announcement that we had joined on this, we were on this tour, because the magnifying glass was being kept there because of and this isn't a condemnation of like antics on Twitter, but like how can the conversation shift when the two main, and I guess I'll just come out and say like the main reason why everyone is displeased Ronnie and actions, alleged actions, all these different things, is being antagonistic on Twitter and fanning those flames, of course, right? Like there's no opportunity for that magnifying glass to go away. Like say we announce this tour and Ronnie takes a vacation, puts his phone away for a week. Honestly, Spiritbox might still be on this tour for good or for better or for worse, because the magnifying glass eventually went away and people have a shorter attention span. And while this might be something that certainly groups of fan bases may bring up at points between now and the tour finally occurring, there was no magnifying glass because, like, theoretically, right? Because it would have gone away. Like, just, it's the news cycle.
It's
Things
generally
just
how everything
fall
works
out
on
of-
social media.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that at its peak, it is like, it feels all consuming, but it almost also ends as quickly as it started in many senses.
But to your point, like this was not just a star that shined very bright upon its announcement. It continued
It
to
lingered.
shine for literally like 72 hours after the fact, and then it reached its peak shine until at that point, you know, Spiritbox, you know, who knows when they made this decision exactly, but like again, that was a magnifying glass that was consistently there. And normally that magnifying glass would have gone away for a lot of other reasons.
That's fair. Air said, as a fan, I was genuinely sad with the support announcement. Spiritbox is a band that we, queer, women, and people of color, feel somewhat of a closeness to what they politically mean. And seeing who they got up to work with just proves how weakly we are supported and listened to in the scene. I think that's fair in a sense that I can't speak to that perspective.
No, we can't.
Right?
It's just the reality of it.
So ultimately, if that's how you feel, I can't question that, right? If that's the reaction you had to seeing Spiritbox's name on the poster, it's valid, you know? And obviously, I think a lot of people shared it because they were outspoken enough about it that it was a catalyst for ultimately, you know, a decision, as best we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Arya said, supporting abusive and transphobic people is bad. And it is good that they dropped it. I don't listen to Ice Nine Kills, but I'm going to be disappointed if Under Oath does not do the same. We are in the middle of an unprecedented attack on trans rights, and people like Radke are not helping.
Yeah, we've said at least the word controversies a couple of times. A lot of those controversies have to do with opinions or behaviors, again, allegedly that Radke has shared around specifically transphobia or trans people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you know, another perspective that we can't really, like, we don't have that perspective in the sense that just we are two token straight white men who just can't provide that personal perspective ourselves. But like Arya said, like, we are in the middle of an unprecedented attack, or I don't even know. I would almost say that that's almost an understatement in a way. There's obviously an attack on trans rights. Take the fucking Hogwarts legacy discourse and every news publication that has, you know,
or even remove the Hogwarts legacy aspect and just narrow it down closer to J.K. Rowling, who is a massively popular figure, like, in pop culture, and their platform is utilized for less than inspiring reasons and has been consistently for years. And similarly, I think that's a lot of the criticism towards Radke, is that ultimately it's less so disagreeing with viewpoints Ronnie has, and more so how he utilizes his platform to share his viewpoints.
Sure, yeah.
Which is why that I think there is a bigger spotlight constantly on Ronnie than there might be on other people who could similarly share those viewpoints, but are nowhere near outspoken about them. Brandon said, I figured they accepted the tour because there wasn't too much heat on Ronald at the exact moment they agreed to it. Then he went on a harassment tour on Twitter, threatened to physically assault multiple people. And personally, I would have started having second thoughts. Now, yes, there is this aspect of the story that included Ronnie not just sort of talking out about this tour in particular, but really going at it with people within the industry on multiple fronts, back and forth. And ultimately, it was the kind of thing where you don't end up looking good when all is said and done, right?
Well, and yeah, and so those are the exact catalysts we were talking about earlier in what I meant when I said the magnifying glass not going away, because everyone is just constantly aware of what's happening. And sometimes, obviously, there's not a lot of good controversy happening around this tour. Some of it's bad because of, inherently because of the subject matter. Essentially, it's like getting into like shit throwing fests or fights with other people online. Like, really, there's nothing to benefit out of from that. And
unless your brand is controversy,
sure,
which
right,
admittedly
yes,
it very well may be, but for many of us, I think that unsurprisingly, it has completely sucked any and all joy out of what might otherwise have been a very exciting tour announcement.
Right. And I think that, and I can't speak on behalf of Spiritbox here, but if I had to pinpoint an exact moment in which Spiritbox, that group chat went off and they said, hey, yeah, guys, probably best we pull out of this one, it's the Andy Sizik stuff, where obviously him and Radke went at it for what felt like 24 hours straight, and feels like the only people that benefited from any of that was Radke, because it's intentionally part of the
because
that
the
controversy.
Goal, if the goal is to get your name trending consistently,
Yeah.
then mission accomplished. But
And then the rest
I guess
of
that's
lost.
fine if you don't mind sacrificing other things in the process. Sure. Shannon said, I think it's pretty silly, to be honest. I feel like Spiritbox was bullied off the tour by their fans, but now those fans are still just as mad because Spiritbox took it in the first place. It was a lose-lose for Spiritbox. I see that viewpoint. I do see that it is so fucking hard to make everyone happy no matter what you do. So ultimately, I think you just get up and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Drew said, the fun part about having a band is having the ability to do whatever you choose with it. Think if Spiritbox had a change of heart and doesn't want to go on tour, they're well within their rights to do so. I've seen bands drop off tours for more stupid reasons. Another fairly insightful comment in the
pretty level-headed.
Does this matter ultimately? I guess I can't say, but right now it doesn't feel like, this story really has the weight that it had in the moments that it was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spiritbox decided to drop off the tour. All right, moving on. Brian said, bullied off the tour by a loud group of angry, political, narcissistic individuals. Concerts should be about music, not about politics. If you don't like who is on this tour, don't go to the show, but ruining a lineup for the other people for selfish political reasons sucks. Now, for what it's worth, all of this context provided, the Popular MonsTour completely selling out, almost guaranteed at this point. Like, in terms of the success from like a monetary and in terms of its popularity, not even slightly, like the foundations of this are completely solid, right?
Right. And this isn't like a fresh thing, especially for Falling in Verse, in the sense that like we're coming off of like the Rockzilla tour, which was split into two parts, that did incredibly well, and a lot of those dates of like 8,000 cap venues were selling out. The more interesting aspect in that conversation is the fact that it really didn't need the controversy to do it.
I think that's ultimately...
And I'm not saying it's been a quiet 8 months for Ronnie by any means, but like certainly like that tour was going on, and people in tune with this scene weren't aware of it, but it was selling out, right? And that was with like Papa Roach and shit too. So like that band pulls, they have been for 20 years, whatever. But it, you know, obviously Falling in Reverse, second build on that, or first build, co-headliner, I don't exactly know. And again, another tour that's selling really well. And to your point, like this one, by all means, seems like it's going to be selling out. But what's interesting is you go off of the merit or the strength of each lineup, and it's like, sure, like these are all bands that could, like on paper, this sells out just before before announcement. And that's obviously why this was a bill that was put together. Like that's why these lineups all exist, because the end goal is to sell out the Popular MonsTour because it's a financially
like a great decision for all parties involved. Yes. I know a lot of people share this viewpoint, right? Which is ultimately that, listen, there are so few things in life that bring us joy. I wish I could turn my brain off and just enjoy them. A lot of people share that sentiment, and it's hard because I don't know that you can do that without sort of sacrificing someone else in the process. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, I think ultimately this tour sells out because most people don't care. They just want to go see fucking bands they like. And that's really that is exactly the level at which they end, right? And all of this additional detail is completely, like they've completely eluded it, right? They like Falling in Reverse songs. They like Ice Nine Kills songs. They like Spiritbox songs. And that is why they're purchasing a ticket, right? And everything outside of that is almost noise, right? And obviously it's a position of privilege.
Right.
But it's not surprising that this is exactly sort of where we end ultimately, which is that like the Popular MonsTour will still end up being a raging success for everyone involved. But for what it's worth, I don't think it will, for Spiritbox in particular, halt their success in any manner either, which is why you look at a comment from earlier where it's like, this just feels like kind of nothing really, if you think about it. And it's like, I understand that perspective because that's where it sits at the moment.
And I guess ultimately, I don't think you and I have too much more to add to this conversation. I think that, you know, when we surveyed the community, I think that we got a lot of great feedback, and you know, of course, we weren't able to get to all of them here, but I think
But this covered the vast majority
of all of the opinions,
viewpoints,
yeah,
precisely.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. The Popular MonsTour is off to an interesting start, clearly, with all of this controversy, and we'll see if there's any more to come.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone's feedback on this.